Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, SmartLists for Data Analysis. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us today. There are a couple of housekeeping items we'd like to mention before we begin the presentation. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please either raise your hand so we can unmute you, or you can submit them through the GoToWebinar question box. We will answer questions throughout the presentation and we'll also be following up after the presentation to answer any additional questions. I'd like to introduce today's speaker. We have Daniel Speck, who is a client care consultant here at Socius. So at this point, Daniel, I believe we're ready to transition over to you.
Great, thank you so much. There's a nice little image of your webinar dashboard. All right, so we're going to begin with discussing the basic smart list. Then we'll get into a little bit of SmartList Builder, and if there's time, we'll get into some of the SmartList Designer. So let's just dig right into it here. So if we go right into SmartList, SmartList is a great way to view data in rows and columns, to push things out to Excel and report on things in a familiar place like Excel where you're used to. Unfortunately, they don't always have all the information you need, and that's where we'll get into the customization. Just a real brief overview of SmartList here. Let's say we wanted to get a list of our vendors. So we can go to our purchasing and expand out. We see all the different SmartLists that are defaulted in there. We expand out on our vendors. And you can see by default there are a few favorites already created, and a favorite just means that there's some search criteria for those vendors that are important or relevant, so you'd want to run that same SmartList multiple times. So we're going to just run the basic vendor SmartList. We get a nice view of our vendors here, but we realize there's a few additional fields that we really want to see. So right out of the bat, without doing any modifications to the SmartList itself, we can click on the columns button and take a look to see what columns are available to be added. By default, this pulls from some of the data in the payables transaction SQL view. There's the available columns that are defaulted on there, or all columns. So when we look in the available columns, we realize here's the 1099 type that we wanted to add. We wanted some 1099 information for our vendors. So we click OK and click OK, and then we have that 1099 information. We can see what 1099 type and if they are a 1099 vendor. So in addition to this, though, we really want to see the email address. Well, we come to our columns, we click Add, and we look at all of the columns. And unfortunately, as we look here alphabetically, we don't see anything email. So we're thinking we're out of luck. We can't use the email on the SmartList, but there's good news, and that's that we have SmartList Builder. So SmartList Builder actually was released on version 8 of Great Plains, and it was a tool released to be able to create and modify new SmartLists. It was originally sold by Microsoft, but back in 2014 it was given back to E1, who was the original development. So Microsoft no longer OEMs the product. You get it directly from E1 with Socius' help, of course. So let's go and make a smart list that we can utilize that has that email address for our vendors. So I'm going to navigate to our Dynamics GP menu and our Tools and SmartList Builder and SmartList Builder. So when you first open SmartList Builder, you see that there's a couple options here. You can make a new one or modify an existing. Now, I strongly encourage you to always create a new one. You can create a new one based upon an old one, but it's good to make a new one because if you go and modify an existing one, it kind of changes it for everyone. So anyone that uses that existing SmartList will see the change. I've had several support cases where someone modifies an existing SmartList and adds another table, and it kind of plays with the results then for everyone else because they've added additional data or a join that's not a one-to-one relationship. So we're going to select new, and I'm going to creatively call it vendors with email. And I'll give it a very creative name as well, calling it vendors with email. And I'll have it show up in my purchasing folder. So when we were in SmartList, we saw the list of the different categories there on the left-hand side. We can select where you want it to show up. So this is just going to be a basic one for the start here. So I really like the vendors SmartList that I have right now. So I'm going to click on the plus here to bring in a new object into this SmartList itself, and we'll go over some of these other options later. And right away out of the box, I could pull in a GP table or another SmartList. Later on, we'll see how we can pull in SQL objects as well. But for now, I'm going to actually start with the SmartList because again, I like my vendor SmartList. I just want to add the email. So I'll click on SmartList. I'll look at the default SmartList we have here, and I'll look for our vendors list. So I'll pull that in. So now we have that same vendor SmartList that I was just looking at. Now I didn't save my changes of adding the 1099 types. Well, default that in here, and now what I want to do is pull in that email address. So this time, instead of pulling in another SmartList, I'm going to pull in the email table. But wait, I'm not sure what that email table is. What can I do? Well, there's a great tool called Table Finder. So let's take a look. Now in GP, I know where I can find that email address. I'm going to navigate to my purchasing, and I'll go to my vendor card, pull in my favorite vendor here. And I know if I click on this globe, that's where I enter my email addresses. There it is, Socius1 at socius1.com. So I want to find out what is this table that stores this information. So I can go to my Tools, Table Finder, and this is something that is added when installed when you install SmartList Builder. And it kind of lays out each table that makes up this information, and the fields that are in that table, and the SQL information for it. So as I kind of look through here, I can see, internet addresses. That's an internet address. That would make sense that it would be in there, and I'll kind of scroll through here and see if there's one that looks like it. Oh, the email to address. That's the email addresses too, so I can see that's probably the field I need there. I can see a SQL script here that can be run to view that table. I can see the SQL name, the table name, the technical name, and all the information I'll need for that. So now I know it's the SY01200 internet addresses table. So I'm going to go back to my SmartList here, and I will pull it up. And I'm going to add an additional table here. So now I'll go to my adding of GP table. I can see it's the internet addresses, so I'm going to switch that to company table. And the table name, internet addresses. Now I need to find a way to connect those two. So I can look at the fields here and find two that would match. So kind of the unique thing for the table would be the vendor ID. And for the internet addresses, I can look through here and the master ID, because you can have both an internet or an email address for both a customer and a vendor, it's just a master ID versus a specific one for vendors. So I'll go ahead and save that connection. And save. So now we can see that I have that additional table added. Now click on it and I'll decide which fields from that table I want to default on. So all of them would be available because they're in the display, but I want to see which ones I want to default and actually show on that report. So I want the email to address. All right, and I'll go ahead and save that. I'll go back to my SmartList here. I'll go ahead and close out some of these other ones here too, so we keep a little bit of clean desktop. And I'm going to go back to my SmartList. It'll tell me a change is made. I'll go ahead and let it create that new SmartList. It's going through all the columns and fields there. So now when I expand out purchasing, I'll see a new one called vendors with email. And when I run that, I see that I have the vendor with an email address. Well, let's say we wanted to be a little different though. We wanted to see all vendors and their email address if they have one. Right now it's set to only show me a vendor if they have one, but we want to see everyone along with it. So we can go ahead and highlight this SmartList we started on. We can click Modify, and it brings us right into SmartList Builder. And this is where your join is going to come into play. So I'm going to click on this little Edit Selected Table button. And what we can do right now, we have it set to an equals, which would be like an inner join. So only when the object exists in both tables will it appear. As we saw, we have one record. Well, I'm going to go ahead and change that to a left outer. Go ahead and save that. So what that means is everything on the left and then anything on the right, as long as it has, everything on the, yes, left and everything on the other side if it has a matching record. Well, if I don't want to have to go all the way back to my SmartList to see how things look, I can go up here and to the options and click Preview the Data. This will give you a nice preview of how the data is going to look in the new SmartList. So if I go ahead and save it, and I go back to my SmartList, we can now see that we have all the vendors along with the one that has the email address. And the other ones just stay blank. So again, all I had to do is change that join from the equals to the left. Let's go ahead and explore some of the other options within a SmartList here. So I'm going to go ahead and go back and click Modify. So within here, we can, if we wanted to add some restrictions, like people for a certain state, vendors from a certain state, we can click on the restrictions. You can add one so that you can only see certain bits of information to try to limit your SmartList down. You only want to see people with a certain 1099 type. Now I could come up here and search the SmartList itself, or I could hard code a restriction so that I don't need to do that additional step. And there's no limit to the number of restrictions that you can need to, or you're available to do there. Another thing we can do is add a go-to. So go-to is that nice thing that you see in some of the default SmartLists when you double click it and it opens up the window that the information is stored in. So let's go ahead and set one up for our vendors here. So we'll click on go-to and we'll add a new one. There's some built-in ones that are already set to go. You can open a form, you can open a separate file outside of GP, open up another SmartList, you can even have it open up a website, execute a procedure, run a drill down that you can set up separately, or a separator. So just have it open up a form, and we're going to have it open up the vendor card. So I'll creatively call it vendor card. And for the product, we'll start with Microsoft Dynamics GP. And purchasing. And the form is the vendor maintenance window, which we were looking in earlier. Go ahead and add it. So we want to set a field and run a script. So if we need to know how we do that with a field, we can actually open up the window itself and then kind of pretend like we're SmartList putting information. If you just enter information, does the window populate, or do you need to enter it, then tab off or run the dexterity script? And the field we're going to populate is the vendor ID, and we're going to populate it from the vendors and the vendor ID field. And save it. Then we can set it to be the default go-to for that SmartList. So again, we can save that. And it's going to automatically update our SmartList here. So to kind of demonstrate what I was referring to is, if you want to know how you need to populate the windows, you saw some different options of just filling in a field or filling in a field and running a script. So in here, if I just type in a vendor, well, nothing happens. I need to type it in, then click tab, and then that's kind of simulating that. Populate the field, then run a script. So that's kind of a way to know whether or not you just need to enter piece of information, or if you actually need to unturn multiple, or if you need to run a script afterwards. So let's go back to our smart list here. And I'll go ahead and double click on one of these here. And you can see it brings us right to the vendor card. It might be a good way to go through and try to see which vendors might be missing an email address. If all of them have them but one or two, I could double click there, come in here, easily add the email address. Save it, and it would dynamically update the smart list then with that additional email to address here. Actually, we'll refresh it so it populates in there. But so now we can see we have both email addresses in there. So the drill down again, not drill down, I'm sorry, the go-to is a nice feature there for that. So we can further modify our great smart list here. So we talked about go-tos, we talked about restrictions, columns, if you want to default the order of the columns, if you want the email address before, you can move it up and down, top and bottom, so you can kind of order your information ahead of time. Calculations we'll get into a little bit on the next smart list that I'll make. But you can see some of the other things. If you wanted to duplicate this one, if you like how it looks, you want to make a new one, say it's pretty advanced, you can duplicate it, give it a new name, preview the data, which we did. You could create a SQL view based upon it. You could display the SQL behind it. You can see it's not the clearest there, but it's just select star from the SmartList Builder vendors view, left join in that 0-1200 table, and join in the match ID equals the vendor ID. And you can show the calculated fields that are in there, the fields that you're selecting, any restrictions that you added, etc. So you can kind of really see that SQL behind it. So you can also edit field settings. So if you want to change how the date field is going to look, currency fields, and we'll show that in the next one as well, a little further. So this is just your standard view. If you want to print the setup information for this, you can do that, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we'll kind of talk about our next one here. So another thing that's really nice is let's say you want to have a backup of this, or maybe you have a different entire system that, a test environment that is separate from this one, and you want to bring that smart list over. You can import and export. So you could export this smart list to an XML file, and you can bring it into your test environment and back and forth. So it gives you a chance to play with them there. And then we'll talk a little bit further about the export solutions and some additional functionality here as time goes. So within this, we talked briefly about, back to SmartList itself, we talked briefly about the favorites. So let's say I added a restriction, and I just wanted to see the vendors that have a 1099 type, miscellaneous. I could click search, I could add my restriction. I can change the number of records here. So let's say I have more than 1,000. You could set it to be up to 900 and however many that big int handles there, but click OK. And now just those vendors that are set up for 1099 type miscellaneous appear. Well, this is the one that I'm going to be running quite a bit. If I click off and come back, I'm going to lose that search. So I can click on favorites, and I can call it miscellaneous. You can add it as a favorite, or you can even add it as a favorite and a reminder. So on your home page, you get a reminder to run that smart list periodically. So I added it as a favorite, and then it's there. Now within the favorite itself, you can make it viewable to the entire system, which so anyone who logs into GP will see that miscellaneous favorite just to a certain company, certain ID, like your own user ID. Let's say you have lots of favorites, but you don't want everyone else to see all your favorites. You can make it so only your user sees it, or a certain user class. All right, so it's kind of our first, nice basic smart list there. We added in the email address. So let's say we wanted to create a smart list to view payables transactions. Now we see this one here. We wanted to do one that's slightly different. So again, we'll go ahead and close out a SmartList. And we'll say, well, we know we enter a payables transaction in the payables transaction entry window. We can go to our table finder and try to get some information of what tables might be used in here. You know, we can see some apply tables or stored in payment work. We can see tax information stored, and we can kind of go through and decide what information we want to create it from. That's kind of a handy tool. So let's say, though, you don't have SmartList Builder installed, and we just have SmartList Designer, which we'll cover briefly at the end. There is another tool that doesn't go into as much detail, but it does show you kind of the windows that are there, or the tables that make up the window. And that's just, if you go to Tools, Integrate, and Table Import, it's kind of an old way to go and view the same list of tables. You don't get the detail and you don't get the field information, but at least you see the list of tables that are storing this information. All right, so we know we want to create a transaction, payables transaction SmartList here. So we'll close out of here. And we'll go ahead and go to our Tools, SmartList Builder, and SmartList Builder. Again, we want to make a new one. We don't want to modify an existing. So we're going to do, call this one Payables Transaction. And again, you probably wouldn't create one that already exists, but for demonstration purposes, it's an area that most people are familiar with, the payables. So I thought I'd utilize that. And again, I'm going to keep it under purchasing. I could put it under company or a different area if I didn't want it to appear there. For this table, it's kind of unique though, because for payables, there's multiple tables. We saw in the table finder, there's a work table, and there's also an open table and history table. Now, I do know there's a view that has all that stuff in it together, but let's say we didn't know that and we just wanted to bring in data from multiple tables like that. There might be instances where you can't just pull in a view that has it. So I'm going to click plus in Microsoft Dynamics table. I'll start with the open table. So we'll go to our payables transaction open file. So now I'll pick a few transactions, few of the fields here. Type, date, number, amount, and current transaction amount. Those are the main fields I'm concerned with. But right now, if I ran this, I'm only going to see what's open, but I really want to see what's in work as well. So I'm going to go back and edit the table. And we see this button called Match Tables appear. I'm going to click on Match Tables, and we can show, let's just say all transactions. So I'll click on the plus here, and I want to bring a table in that I want the information from. And this is kind of be in SQL, if you're familiar with SQL, kind of like a union. You're going to be pulling in the information all into one. So we'll go ahead and do our payables transaction work file and save. So what's really nice is that it automatically matches every field it can. So discount amount is not matched, transaction source, because it's not posted, it doesn't have a transaction source. So the fields that it doesn't match, they'll just stay blank. You can see as you go through, I mean, a great number of these are all matched. Let's go ahead and pull in the history as well here then. Tax history here. I know the history is called something a little different here, so just got to remember what we have here though. And I could use my table finder to utilize that here. All right, so paid transaction history file. Pull that in, and that's going to join those fields as well, how it's matched. And you can see it's almost a one-to-one. Everything's matched there. So, all right, we'll go ahead and call it all transactions, and we'll save it. So now we can see it looks a little bit different there. It shows you have the multiple tables joined together, so it's not just the open, but it'll be all three tables. So I mentioned we're going to talk about some of the other fields that are available within the SmartList Builder here and some of the other options available. So let's talk about calculations. So within the calculated fields here, we have the ability to do quite a bit here. There's some special fields and functions available. So we have a string function. So if you want to, get any of these different functions, you want to get the left 5 characters of some field, or you want to trim it to get rid of spaces. You want to stuff some data in the middle of a field. Whatever you want to utilize there. There's a KB article 929-207 that does go over some of these functions and how each one works. System functions, if you want to cast it as a different, as a string instead of a integer or something like that. Case statement, if then else, or case when. Your math functions, if you do, you want to round things to a nearest decimal place or things like that. Of course, this is all above my head. I'm not the math whiz, but no, they're all very usable, and you can read more in the KB as well. Absolute values might be for certain document types, things like that. So I'm going to keep a pretty basic one here, but I'm going to go back to our fields, and I want to see the amount that's been paid. So I'm not going to worry about pulling in the apply table. I just want to find out how much has been paid. So to do that, I can go ahead and take the original document amount, pull it in. I can use my keyboard and just put a minus there. And so if I take the document amount minus the current transaction amount, so the current transaction amount represents what has been, or what's left, what's available. So if I subtract those two, it'll tell me the amount that's been paid. And we'll have this be a currency. We can validate it to make sure it's valid. Of course, this is a pretty basic one. When we're using some of the advanced functions, it'll be more relevant there to validate it. And save that, and click OK there. So now we see a whole separate listing in our tables for that those calculated fields that we created. So now we'll have our current transaction amount, document amount, and amount paid. So just to briefly talk about another one here, and that's the summary. Summary lets you do a couple different things in here. So let's say we were going to summarize our SmartList, which I'm not actually going to do at this time, but what you could do is, let's say you wanted to find out the total number of invoices per vendor for a time frame. So you could come in here, you could set the vendor ID to be a group by. So whatever value you wanted to group by and count, that's what you'd leave as a group by. Obviously we have a lot of fields here because the tables that we brought in, but so we could do a summary, and we could, if we have time, make another one of these too, but summary method group by for vendors, and then you'd go to your voucher number, your transaction number, and set that to be a count. That way you'd have that field showing the count, and then you'd group it by vendor. So every vendor, how many transactions you have, you could have a SmartList that shows your count, your average, min, max, sum of all the invoices that were paid, things like that. Over here, you are able to bring in multiple companies. So let's say most users have many companies across the board. You want a SmartList that shows the same data for all companies. You can go ahead and check off the companies that you want the SmartList to display. Now, one thing to note for this that we see sometimes is, let's say you have 5 companies and all 5 are marked here. If a user that's trying to run the SmartList, if they don't have access to all 5 companies, they're not going to see any results, because you'll get an error saying no access in the back end of SQL. So if you create one that's for multiple companies, a user runs it, they don't see any information, that means that they probably don't have access to one of the companies. So you could either verify that, or you can run a SQL profile trace and quick see which company it's airing out on. So again, I'm not going to worry about doing multiple company or summary, but we'll just cancel out of there. So yeah, but I have the information I wanted. I wanted to add that calculated field, so I'm making a new transaction here, transaction SmartList here. We talked about columns and go-tos, restrictions. So we'll go ahead and save, and we'll take a look at it. So we'll go to our Dynamics GP, and we'll navigate to SmartList, and we'll detect a change, so we'll say yes to let it create the new one. We told it to go to the purchasing folder, so it's in there. We can right-click and increase the width here, so if we want to see all the names, We see our old one that we made last time. So we'll just go to our payables TRX there. All right. So let's see if it have that additional field there that we could pull in. So let's go back and modify this one here. Look at it. Let me see our calculated field amount paid. I wasn't noticing it there in the, oh, there it is in the first column. And again, you can go in here, you can arrange the order of the columns as well. So I just put it in the first thing. I was thrown off for a second. I'm like, where's my amount paid? Well, here it is. So I just move it to the bottom. Makes a little more sense. I'll save that and save that. And it automatically updates it. And now I see my amount paid. So you can see a document amount. That's currently what's owed. So that means that $2,000 has been paid. This one's fully paid. So utilize the calculated field then to pull in some of the information that you wanted. We could, of course, create a go-to that pulls up the voucher number in an inquiry window, or the, however you'd want to do that. So sky's the limit. Well, let's say that it's getting a little advanced here. So let's say you want to come in here, you have analytical accounting data you want to see, and some GL data, maybe some purchasing data. And when you're in SmartList, you start thinking, boy, this is maybe a little too much to try to join all these different tables together. So what you can use is definitely just utilize a SQL view. So I'm going to go to our tools, SmartList Builder. So again, let's say just kind of visualize it here. Say you want to try join the 4 AA tables together, and you want to bring GL, and you think about it. Yeah, it's just too much for SmartList. Let's make one SQL view that has it all, and then we can utilize it much cleaner and easier. So I'm going to start over in SQL then. Open up SQL Studio Manager, and hey, look at that. There's a view right there ready for me. So it's a view that I wrote a while back. Just has some analytical accounting data and some general ledger data. So I'm going to go ahead and create it. Click Execute. So one thing to note too is after you create a SQL object for a SmartList, any view, you want to be sure that all users can see it. If I just made it without running the grant statement to the bottom here, only the SA or SQL users that have full access would be able to utilize that view. But if I go ahead and run at the end, grant, select permissions on this view to the dine group, and the dine group is the default group that all the new GP users have. That means that any GP user can run a select statement against this view. So now I have this great view in my SQL company database. So we'll minimize SQL Studio Manager there, and we'll go back and continue on here. So this time out of the box, I'm not going to see that view as available because there's some additional security set up here within SmartList Builder. So a side note here, there's a nice Excel builder, navigation lists if you utilize those builder, and drill down builders. We talked about the import export. Basic maintenance, let's say you're having some issues not seeing on your SmartList, or your lists aren't refreshing, you added a column, you're not seeing it. You can refresh them, you can check certain items, have it create views based upon your SmartList that you made, etc. But back to the topic at hand here, if you go into security and SQL table security, even though it's a view, it still is a SQL table security. So I'm going to give it access to the database, and I'm going to go to that view, the AAGL view that I made. So mark that off, and now that means that SmartList can utilize that object. And the idea, again, is that you're preventing someone from creating a view maybe for payroll data or from some other thing that's in the company that database that you might not want them to see. But you see any objects in here, and you just grant security to it. I'll click OK. I'll navigate back to our SmartList Builder. Tools, SmartList Builder, SmartList Builder. I will creatively call this AAGL. GL data with analytical accounting. I knew better than trying to have myself spell something difficult on a webinar, but I think I can manage. All right, we'll tab through that, and we'll put this under our financial. Or if I wanted, I could put it under analytical accounting as well. So I can even put that there. So for now, I'll just put it under our financial. And this time when I click plus, you can see there's some additional options here now. Before, nothing was given security, so we couldn't access objects in that to database, but now I have. So now I can pull in a SQL table, or I can actually paste my script in here and utilize the script itself. So if I wanted to paste that whole script in here and set the key fields, that would be another way to do it. But since I made a view, I'm going to go ahead and click on it to collect a view. Click on my database, click on my views, and that's the only one that I've given access to, so that's the one that shows up there. Now you'll see an option called Use Company Database. Well, let's say I had this view in every single one of my company databases. You could either hard code it so that, let's say I'm in company A, it'll only show the company A's data regardless of what company I'm in. So if I'm in company B, it's still only going to show company A's data. If I'm company C, it's still going to only show A. Or if I mark this, whatever company I'm in, that's the company that will show the data for us. If I'm in A, it'll show A's data. If I'm in B, it shows B's data. If I'm in C, it'll show C's data. The one key thing is that you need to have the view created in each company. Key fields are mainly utilized for the go-tos if you want to drill back on things. So I'm going to just put journal entry, and I'll do the year one. We'll save that. So then all of the fields that were on my view are here and available to be used. If I don't like the name of some of them, I can come in here and override it. Etc. And that's how it's going to display when I go on there. And let's say there's some I don't really think are necessary right now, like recurring sequence numbers. So I'll go ahead and remove that. So one other thing to kind of note here. So let's say I have a debit amount, for example. I can really manipulate here how that's going to view within the SmartList itself. So if I highlight a field and I click on this blue expansion arrow, I can select whether or not I want to show the currency symbol, 1,000 separator, percent sign if it's a percent. Let's say I pull in a field called account index. Well, for this view, I actually already did that, so it pulls the account in, but let's say I was just pulling in the standard GL transactions. Well, instead of having to join in the account master table and have that additional step, you can come in here and mark account index. So if you have an account index field, you can check this, and then it actually automatically goes through to the GL 105 table, pulls in that full account string. Same with the note. So let's say there's a note, you want to see the notes that are added to transactions or to a vendor card, and you don't want to worry about pulling in the note table. You can mark that and it automatically pulls it back, and you can view it then. Same thing here with decimal places. Typically for dollars you'd see 2, but let's say maybe for items you have quantities that go further out based upon the field, or you can hard code it in. And then negative values as well. You can have negative values appear the same as they appear somewhere else, or based it on a different field. For standard entries, what you can do is, let's say it's a text here, you can come in here and you can format the string. So let's say it's a phone number field, it'll automatically parse out and make it look like a phone number. You can set a mask up, so if you don't want to view a full number like a social security number, you can either have it parse it as that, or you can mask it so that it doesn't appear properly. So people don't see that information, but maybe just the last 4 digits. The last thing is if you had a value of like series. So in this instance, I already set this up in the view, but maybe we'll give an example later on here where it'll be available. But you can actually set it to say, let's say if the value is 1, print this. If it's value 2, print financials. If it's 3, print sales. If it's 4, print purchasing. That way, you can make the results more usable for the people using the SmartList. So this is available again on any kind of SmartList. You can drill in and change how things are viewed for you. We'll go ahead and save that. And we'll go ahead and open up our smart list. We'll say yes to the changes. All right, let's go back in here and put under financial, and we put GL data with AA. And it looks like I have here's my GL data, and right now none of these are showing any AA assignments. I just have a little bit of sample data that is AA assignments in there, but I could do a search and just show me where the AA dimension code is not equal to blank. And if I have any that have GL AA codes in there, then it would populate. So great. So let's go back and let's look one more time at that payables transaction. So I'm purchasing, and I created this nice payables transaction smart list. Well, I just noticed this document type of 1. Doesn't make much sense to me. What does 1 mean? Or especially to the users, you've heard a lot of feedback that it's not relevant. They don't know what that means. So we can go ahead and modify this one. Go back in here and let's utilize that functionality I was just talking about. So for the document type, I'm going to click this blue expansion arrow, and it defaults here. So let's say if it lists 1, it's going to be an invoice, and if it's 6, we're going to say it's a payment. Now, of course, 5s are credit memo, etc. 4s return, etc., etc. I'm just going to utilize these 3 for time's sake here. So now when I save this again, comes back. Now when I view, instead of a number 1, it says invoice. So that's more relevant for the user, it makes more sense. All right. So that's kind of the brief overview, I would say, of SmartList. There's definitely quite a bit of information in there that you can utilize and make really the report that works for your company. So I'm going in and I'm kind of looking at some of these smart lists here. I'm going to go back and just look at a financial transactions one out of the box here. So this isn't one that I created, just the basic financial account transaction smart list. And I say, I really like this data. I'm going to go ahead and export this to Excel. So one of the nice functionalities within SmartList, and you don't need Builder for this, it's just the default one, is to be able to export to Excel or to Word. So I'm going to click on the Excel button here. You're going to watch this process go across here. And this process was sped up quite a bit in some of the newer versions. It used to take a lot longer to export. And one of the drawbacks, though, to the speed up process is that it basically is doing now a direct table dump, where it used to try to format it for you, make it look good, but that took a lot longer to export. So now it's just kind of a direct table dump. And in the tables, they store 5 decimal places. Well, this really doesn't look that nice to you. You want it to show the 2 decimal places and the $sign. So this is where we can utilize a great feature called export solutions. So to do an export solution, we first set each column to be exactly what we want it to be. So I'm going to format this first cell to be a text here, and a B to be text here. C will have a date field. Account number, account description, we'll make it be text again. And for the debit amount and the credit amount, we're going to have those be currency. So I'll set it to be currency, 2 decimal places with a $sign. Well, every time it exports it, we don't want to see this data, so we're just going to go, but we want to utilize the formatting, so we're just going to click in the corner. We're going to clear the data, clear the contents, and we're going to save this to our desktop or any shared location. It has to be somewhere that people can utilize or can all access if they want to utilize this functionality. So I'm going to call this the GL transaction export solution. And I'll close out of here. So I'm going to go up to SmartList, and you can see all the same options are here, but there's an additional one here called Export Solutions. Click on that. I want this to be an Excel one. I'll come up here, give it a name. This is the GL transactions. Select that document that I just created on my desktop. If you want to have a macro that runs ahead of time or afterwards, you can do that to prepare the file how you want it. And I want to associate this with my basic out-of-the-box account transactions. You could make them specific to any of the favorites, but I'm just doing one for time's sake, kind of right, with the base one there. Set to Excel, and it's visible to everyone. Again, you could do just to yourself. Go ahead and save it here. So now we can, if you want to view what's there, it's there. Close out of there, and come back into SmartList here. We'll go back to our financial and our account transaction SmartList here. This time when we click on Excel, we see a down arrow. You can do the same quick export as before, or we can utilize that export solution that I created. If I click on that export solution, it's taking a little longer, kind of like the old SmartList did, because again, it's not just exporting the data, but it's actually formatting it. When it's a really large SmartList, it can make a noticeable difference in time, but for here, we're doing 1,000 rows of GL data, so it's not taking that much time of our presentation. And of course, it does require that for them to be opened and utilized, that Excel is on the station. And the countdown. So it creates a file right in our temp directory, and then it opens it up right in Excel. And now when we opened it, instead of having those 5 decimal places, everything's defaulted in correctly. You can see we have the 2 decimal places, we have the currency symbol, and everything here's text and date and how we want it. So this way, when it exports it, we can really make it how you want to view it. So we'll close out of that, and that then stays for my user, or for any user that needs to utilize that functionality. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close out here, and I'm going to disable our SmartList builder as if I didn't have it installed. So I'm going to go to Tools, Customize, Customization Status, and we'll go to our SmartList builder. So one thing that is kind of noticed, when we uninstall or disable SmartList builder, we'll see a new tool that was just released, I believe it was R2 of 2013, called SmartList Designer. So it's not quite as much functionality, but it can get the job done if you don't have anything else. So again, I'll go to my SmartList. One thing you'll notice is that we have our other SmartList there because they're still installed. It's just disabled. But if you actually uninstall SmartList Builder, then you wouldn't see the new SmartList at all. So that's one thing to say. See upgrade. You decide not to purchase SmartList Builder. Well, those SmartLists that you created with SmartList Builder aren't going to be available anymore. So just a side note on that. Let's go ahead and make a new SmartList here. So I'm going to just click off here, and I'm going to click on the new button. Let's try maybe an account list here. So if I click new, it's going to come in here and it's going to default whatever SmartList I have open right now. So it defaults in those accounts fields that are in here. So if you want to just add additional fields, kind of like we saw with that email address. So we have the vendors, or we wanted to add an additional table. Well, we could do that. That's similar information here. Let's say for this one, we really wanted to see additional account information. So I could come over here. I could go to our Dynamics GP tables, financial tables, expand it out here. And we could pull in like the account master. Now if I clicked here, it would default all the fields on there, where before you could just say which ones to display and which ones to default. Well, here, anything you click is going to be defaulted in. Now I want to see active, so I mark on active, and it adds that additional field there. Now I need to tell it how to join the 2 tables together. So I could come in here, start with my account master. The account index is kind of the unique field for that. So kind of like we saw in SmartList Builder, where you did the inner join to the left join. If you only want to see, utilize, so again, if it had like an email address, you'd want to utilize them all, you do left, or inner if you just want to see the ones that have it. In this case, it's going to be a one-to-one relationship, so it doesn't really matter. Let's go to inner join, we can go to accounts. And actually, we'll have to pull in the account index field. But that would be how you'd pull in some additional deleter things. So you can see it's a little more touchy on things here. But so if we had our account index field in the accounts, we could go ahead and pull that in. One nice thing though is if you do utilize a lot of SQL views, this is a great tool for bringing in, for you showing and displaying SQL view information. So let's go back to that AAGL one. I'm going to remove these default ones there. And let's say I really want to make one here for that. I have that AAGL view that I just created, and I want to view it in a SmartList. I know a SmartList Builder. So again, I could come in here and I could say GL with AA data, short for analytical accounting. I could choose where I wanted to view, which module, which folder. And what I could do is if I scroll to the very bottom, I can see all those SQL views that I created in the company database. So I'll let it expand out here and we'll see all the views. Now this doesn't have an additional set of security where you have to go in like we did in SmartList Builder and say which ones people can use and can't. Of course, you still do need to have the account set to allow, select rights. So as long as the Dynasty group has the select rights, then you'd be able to utilize the SmartList here. Otherwise, it would just be the SA user that could show it. If I only wanted certain columns, I could expand it out, click the columns I want, but I want them all here. So I marked that SQL view that I made and put in the system. I don't need to do any table relationships. And if I wanted to do a filter, again, I could hard code a filter on here, or you can do it later on in the search area. One nice thing is I can execute it and preview the data on the bottom here. So we know this is how it's going to look when the SmartList is ran. And let's say I want to format some of the fields. So there's not as much formatting functionality as what we saw in SmartList, but there's definitely some. We can click on the dollar amounts. We can say we want the dollar symbol and 2 decimal places. So we could do that for all the different debit and credit amounts and fields there. So we could preview that again, and we can see that it's going to have that dollar symbols, and here these are the ones I didn't set. These are the ones I did. And it's nice, again, you see the live data. Now in SmartList Builder, we did see where you could preview the data, but this is kind of all together in one place for you. So very simply, we just click OK. We see it with a slightly different name there, so it's different, but the same information is there. So if you have SQL view, really either one's going to work the same. It's when you want to do more advanced summarizing and do more advanced stuff in the SmartList Builder where the builder comes into play versus designer. But I got the same SmartList. I can do the same, export solutions, search and favorites, things like that. So, looking to the future, being that SmartList Builder is back with E1, I know they're doing massive amounts of development, and each release is going to have new and better functionality. Same with Microsoft. As each release of GPA, I believe SmartList Designer is going to have more and more functionality. But this year is in 2016 and has a good kind of overview of the functionality that you have there. So I did want to save a few minutes here. I guess we have about 7 minutes or so, assuming my clock is accurate, for questions. I guess 6 minutes here. If you wanted to ask some questions, I'll definitely open it up to the floor.
Sure. Before we do go in, there are a couple questions, but I do want to let everybody know that our next GP webinar is next Tuesday, August 29th from 1 to 2 Eastern. It's on moving your GP environment to the cloud. And you can find our complete webinar series on our website at socius1.com/events. And then also just a reminder that the GP User Group Summit is coming up October 10th through the 13th in Nashville. You can register now with code PRPSocius to get a 10% discount. So you can talk to your account manager about that if you are interested in joining us there. And then we will go over some questions now. So the first one, can you re-show the go-to function that you were talking about?
Yes. All right, any further questions? No, I will go over this again here. So one of the examples that we utilized was the vendors. So we wanted to open up that vendor maintenance window. So the first step I always kind of talked about was we go to the window itself and we say, what needs to happen for this window to populate? Do I just put in information, or do I have to type in information and then do another thing like tabbing off? So let's say I type in here, start typing Ace Travel, so if I just have the text here, nothing happens. But if I do an additional step and I click tab, or I click somewhere else, which is kind of like running the script, then the data populates. So I know when I'm doing this drill back, I do need to have it run a script as well. So let's look at a new payables transaction smart list, and we can add that same thing there. So if I go ahead and go into our tools, SmartList Builder. Actually, I believe I disabled SmartList for the next, or for the SmartList Designer. So let me real quick turn that back on. So we got SmartList Builder. We'll go ahead and enable it again. So now Designer just disappears, and we'll back to SmartList Builder. So we're at SmartList Builder here. We'll pull in that new one that I made for the payables transactions. And we want to drill back into the vendor ID field. So I'm going to click on the go-to functionality. I'm going to add a go-to. And then I want to open up a form. I want to open up the vendor maintenance window. Again, there are some other options for what can be done, but I'd say most common are going to be the open a form. I'll call it vendor maintenance. Product is Dynamics GP. It's one of the core modules. Series purchasing. And the form, I could tell from having the window open earlier, I got the name of it is the vendor maintenance window. I can click on add. And we have some options here. We can move focus to a certain place in the field. We can run a field script. It's a macro that you want to utilize, and it's going to do whatever functionality you have set up in the macro. Set a value for a field, put a pause in it, and you can actually do a combination of things here. So let's say you had a more complicated window, like one that you have to enter both the year and the vendor. You could set a field, wait a few seconds, or you can set a field, run a script, then you can have them compiled upon each other. But we'll just go ahead and for this one again, we're going to set a field value and run the script because we utilized that. We saw we had to do that to have it be viewed. So it's the vendor ID field that I want to populate, but you see any field that's on that window you could utilize. The vendor ID, I'm going to pull it from the transaction open file and the vendor ID field. Save that and save it. I can make it my default one, so when I click anywhere, it works. I click OK and save. Go back to the smart list. Refresh it. And we'll go to our payables transactions one. And we double click and now it opens up. So again, that's the brief kind of overview of the vendor. And some of them can get complex and some of them don't necessarily work. Some windows might not. If it's like a drop-down list, some of you can't populate. So but that should work. And then there are some default built-in ones too for doing like sales inquiry or different inquiry windows that are more complex. They actually put the dexterity behind it to do that automatically. Sorry, that took up most of our question time, but I think we have time for one more here.
What version of GP is this smart list linked to?
Well, this one right here is 2016.
Okay. And,
RTM.
last but not least, can you just show us real quick how you get to SmartList Builder just initially?
Yeah, absolutely. So we click on the navigate to the Dynamics GP menu, Tools, SmartList Builder, and SmartList Builder.
Awesome. Well, that is all of our questions. Again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to Daniel. We'll definitely get those questions answered. And definitely join us next Tuesday for our GP to the Cloud webinar. But everyone have a great day, and thanks for joining us today.